report, then meron binabayaran. So, yun, walang resibo. Kung yun ang tinutukoy mo, Mr. Speaker, na kung may resibo o wala. So far, Mr. Speaker, our new secretary has not used a single cent of the confidential funds.
Mr. Speaker, to confirm, for 2023, ang confidential fund allocation ng DNR ay hindi po nito nagamit o nagagamit pa.
Hindi nagamit. Yes, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor. Kung gusto mo,
So Mr. Speaker, kung hindi pa naman nagagamit ito ng DNR, mas mainam po na wag na nitong gamitin at mas i-foster na lang ang tighter na coordination with our law enforcement units. Kasi Mr. Speaker, kung gumagana rin naman talagang ating law enforcement units, then pwedeng sila na ang gumawa ng trabaho na pwedeng hindi nasaluhin ng DNR that would justify confidential funds, Mr. Speaker. With that, Mr. Speaker, kasi sa proposal ng DNR for 2024, meron pa ring 13 million na confidential fund. Kung kakayanin din naman ng ahensya na gumana without the confidential fund, is it willing to forgo the proposal to have confidential funds?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, hindi po. Kailangan po nila yon. Kailangan nila, and if so spent, I will ask them for how they spent it with the report sa COA, and I will give a copy to Mr. Speaker, to our Honorable Manuel.
Mr. Speaker, ang huling punto na lang din natin, delikado po kung hindi magsasubmit ng resibo ang ahensya kapag gagamit siya ng confidential fund. Actually, Mr. Speaker, ang hinihingi naman sa Joint Circular 2015-01 ay documentary proof ng paano ginamit yung pondo. So kung hindi po resibo, actually, pwedeng voucher o pwedeng mga invoice. Ang mahalaga, Mr. Speaker, bawat pinagkakagastusan, dapat merong patunay saan siya ginastos. So yun, hindi po pwede na walang kahit ano, no? Kung hindi man resibo, other alternatives na magpapatunay saan talaga ginagamit. So, with that, Mr. Speaker, I end my interpellation and I thank the sponsor for answering the questions.
Mr. Speaker, hindi na ako magsagot doon kasi sinabi na niya kung anong gagawin. Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker. Regarding funds of the DNR, I will show it that yung magbibigay ng resibo, papipirmahin nila. Yung magbibigay tayo ng reward to the information giver, wag mo naman papirmahin yun. Dahil mahirap yun eh. So, Mr. Speaker, yung dapat lang magbigay ng resibo, safe houses, angkas ka sa motor, hindi na kailangan yun ang resibo, maliit na bagay yun, Mr. Speaker. Ngunit, if the fund was misused, then I am with you, Mr. Speaker, and with our distinguished colleague to put an end to the practice of confidential funds. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Huling point na lang, Mr. Speaker, kasi sa practice po namin bilang mga student and youth leaders, kahit anong gastos po yan, pwede pong gawa ng kahit simpleng patunay lamang na pwedeng, kahit nga hindi lahat ng detalye, pero mahalaga lang ay merong katibayan saan ginagamit. Pwedeng kahit simpleng sheet of paper produced by an organization or institution para matrace talaga ang gagamitan ng bawat piso o bawat sentimo. Kaya Mr. Speaker, we really need to set a higher standard sa paggamit ng pondo ng bayan. Kaya patuloy ang ating panawagan na dapat ang mga confidential funds at the minimum nga ay transparent talaga, and maximum, Mr. Speaker, kung hindi naman talaga kailangan, dapat wala ng confidential fund ang mga ahensya. Yun na lang, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, tama po kayo doon. Palitan natin yung 2015 Circular -01 para ilagay doon in toto or talagang klaruhin na, itong expenditure na ito may resibo. Kasi binasa ko po yon while I was governor, optional po yon, but you have to liquidate. And yung submission mo, diretso po sa COA chairman. Then, ma-audit doon. So far, wala naman kami natanggap na AOM. So, Mr. Speaker, kung kailangan talagang lahat ng panggagastos ng confidential funds ay dapat maresibuhan, we so state in the joint circular. We call for the DILG and the COA, including the pertinent offices concerned, to sit down again and issue a new circular. But meanwhile, that 2015-01 circular is in existence. Yun lang po sinusunod, walang iba eh. So, very clear doon, hindi sila lumalabag sa batas. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Ano?
No. Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the next interpolator, Congressman Mujib Hataman of the Lone District of Basilan.
The gentleman from the Lone District of Basilan, the Honorable Mujib Hataman, is recognized for his interpellation.
Kasi,
Yes.
wala rito, Your Honor. Mr. Speaker, absence says yes to the budget of DNR. Diba?
Mr. Speaker, 1 minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Pero we can silang sariling DNR.
We can support. Sino ba yun? Point na.
Picture kayo, dito ba kayo ng... Ano yung camera? Picture lang.
Tayong after ni Muji. Embark.
Go. Oy, okay lang eh. Kung gusto. Bakit? Wala naman tayo nanakaw eh. Kailangan.
Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize Congressman Paul Dasa of the 1st District of Northern Samar for his interpellation.
The gentleman from the 1st District of Northern Samar, the Honorable Paul Dasa, is recognized for his interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon to our guests, the DNR family, and to my colleagues. Good afternoon to our good sponsor,
Afternoon.
Honorable Alvarez.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, our country has 7,000 plus islands. Marine biodiversity conservation and protection is very important, and that's one of the mandate of the DNR. And I know that we have what we call DNR marine stations that will pursue those objectives. Now, my understanding, there's only essentially 4 or 5 existing marine stations. So my question is, in pursuit of conservation of marine biodiversity, is there sufficient funding for this DNR mandate?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, in the 2022 budget and 2023, there was a very meager allocation for the marine stations. But in the 2024 budget, Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, a lump sum of, an amount of 650 million is included in the request, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
And that 650 million is included in the National Expenditure Program as a lump
Yes,
sum.
that is requesting, in addition to everything, there is an additional 640 million being requested for the marine stations after our hearing the SONA of our president for the DNR to take care of the blue economy.
Okay, so there's a pending request for augmentation.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. And should that be granted, I assume DNR will be able to establish new marine stations, and I'm sure there will be requirements of the existing stations and additional conservation plans for this particular mandate. Is that correct?
This is in addition to the existing ones.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. Should the sponsor at the right time make the appropriate motion to augment, as stated earlier, the minority members will support you on that, and I hope the Committee on Appropriations will address this mandate of the DNR and augment the funds. Second one, Mr. Speaker, my second concern, I recall in the last Congress, the LUA was under the DPWH, from what I recollect. And I read in the papers that there was an executive order that was issued that created the Water Resources Management Office that brought in LUA and the MWSS Regulatory Office under the DNR wing. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Okay.
MWSS and LUA is part now of the DNR family per Executive Order number 22, earlier issued by the President, Mr. Speaker.
Now, my understanding also, MWSS has an existing concession under a PPP mode, I think servicing some parts of NCR. And so is it correct that the regulatory function in supervising that concession now belongs, well, essentially to DNR?
DNR, MWSS Regulatory Office. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And the LUA now, and most of the provinces have water districts, and I know LUA has the regulatory and supervisory mandate over the water districts. So essentially, those water districts are now under DNR.
By Executive Order number 22, yes, Mr. Speaker, yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Now, to do those functions, going to require funding allocation. So was the DBM able to include in the 2024 National Expenditure Program sufficient funding to fulfill the mandate of that executive order?
In the Executive Order number 22 issued earlier this year, LUA is now part of the DNR, and LUA is requesting for a 364 million budget for its operations. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Mr. Speaker, how about the MWSS Regulatory Office? Is that sufficiently funded?
In the past, this MWSS Regulatory Office was funded by the two concessionaires. That's why the relationship is very anomalous. So the President in the Executive Order number 22 mandated that NWSS Regulatory Office should now be under DNR, and they are now requesting for a 165 million budget to survive.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for those clarification. I think in principle, that probably was a good move to put it under DNR to avoid, whether true or not, the conflict of interest. So we will support you, Mr. Sponsor, should you wish to make the appropriate amendments to augment the funds, because we want to make sure that those two new functions will sufficiently be funded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, it has been included in the budget request of DNR, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you. Now, my last topic is on reclamation. Earlier this morning, the Office of the President was here, and I had a question on reclamation. We were advised earlier that at 1 p.m., because I had asked, of all the reclamation projects that were suspended, and it was manifested earlier by the OP, that there is one that will continue. And I asked for clarification, which one was that? And the Honorable Tulfo, who was sponsoring the budget of the OP, said, would the Honorable Daza be okay to wait until the pronouncement at 1 p.m.? So I'd like to ask that same question.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, since it's already past 1 o'clock, there is no more pronouncement. And the DNR family is now reiterating that the reclamation in Manila Bay and the other reclamations in country is undergoing further study, and there is no definite date or time yet to issue for them to go ahead with the reclamation, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Okay, so could, Mr. Speaker, could a good sponsor share with us which one was not included in the verbal suspension order of the President?
The suspension order, all of the reclamation projects are suspended in the meantime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but reading from the newspaper articles and from media, that there was one that was allowed to continue because it was already a ripe contract. They had complied, and I think they were already ongoing. So the media articles are not accurate, are incorrect?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, yes, the media reports are incorrect. As of this moment, there is no single reclamation project that has been given the go-ahead to resume operations.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you for
Speaker.
that clarification. Now, is it correct that the suspension order by the President was more of the nature of a verbal order, and there hasn't been any written order to do such.
One minute suspension, Mr. Speaker.
Session suspended. Session resumes. The Honorable Alvarez may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, as of to date, there is no resumption order. But there is no written order from the President, but the PRA has written to the DNR reiterating the order of the President's order with conditionalities. And I don't know that conditionalities. When DNR has finally retrieved, I have not read any, they said they will retrieve, and after I retrieve, Mr. Speaker, I will give His Honor a copy. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, yes, I'd like to get copies of those documentation. I appreciate the candid answer. Now, to clarify for many of the stakeholders, what really is the life of an ECC? And please allow me to explain why I'm asking that. My understanding is some reclamation projects have been issued an ECC while still complying with other requirements. So because they haven't started the project and now it's suspended, what is the life of those ECCs? Is there any statutory, is there any executive order that defines how long the ECCs are good for?
Mr. Speaker, since the suspension order was brought about by the verbal order of the President and the written order by the PRA, the ECC continues to subsist. But before that, the order was to look at the cumulative impact to the environment in Manila Bay, in particular for the reclamations thereat. Since the ECC is still existing, and what is being reviewed now is the impact, cumulative impact for the residents, the project proponents, the future residents, and the waste impact to the reclamation to the bay. So, Your Honor, I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Speaker, is it true that as a matter of practice, the ECC is only really good for 5 years? Meaning, if you don't start the project within 5 years, the ECC can be revoked by the DNR. Is that a correct
Yes,
statement?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, if the project proponent has not started on any in any build-up in the projected area, the ECC will cease to be in effect. Mag-expire po in 5 years' time.
Okay. So what is the effect of the suspension? Is the 5 years told or the 5 years continue?
Mr. Speaker, it's reasonable that since the suspension order is of no doing of the contractor or the proponent, then the life of the ECC exists. If the suspension order goes to 3 months or 4 months, then that is deducted to the life of the ACC for 5 years. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
I saw some officials from the DNR, so if you're in your third year and you haven't started, and let's assume the suspension stays for 1 year, that doesn't extend your 5-year validity of the ECC. Just to make sure that I understood the response correctly.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, if the defect is not attributable to the project proponent, then that will be deducted from the counting of time. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Can we get the assurance from the DNR and the sponsor that reclamation projects that have been issued an ECC, which haven't been started for 5 years, those ECCs should then therefore be revoked?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, if the project proponent has not placed any structure or has not started the project per this description in his application, then that will be deducted from the 5 years. But if it is not of his own doing or neither it is his fault or the proponent's fault, then it shall not be deducted. Mr. Speaker.
Let me rephrase the question, Mr. Speaker. Have there been any ECCs revoked on any reclamation project in the last, let's say, few years?
Yes, according to the DNR, yes, they have revoked the ECCs of prior reclamation projects.
Okay, and are there how many existing reclamation projects that have ECCs that haven't been started within the 5-year period?
In Manila Bay, there are 18 reclamation proponents with ECC, and only 2 have started. That's the Pasay Harbor, and the other one is by SM.
And of the remaining 16, Mr. Speaker, how many, let's just cover Manila Bay, that have ECCs and haven't started within 5 years?
16, Your Honor, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the good sponsor understands my question. Of the 18, 2 have started. So there are 16 left. So of the 16, how many have ECCs and haven't started any work for 5 years?
May isa, naka-start. 5 years. Pero yung iba naka-start na. Yung iba naka-start na.
Hindi pa natapos yung 5 years.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, only one has in the Manila Bay area, and the rest, having been issued, the ACC has also not started, but they have done the documentary requirements.
But
Maybe the 16, of the 16, they are now preparing, but because of the suspension order,
Mr.
back
Speaker,
out there.
no, I appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. My question is just simple. How many of the 16 have not started within the last 5 years from the issuance of their ECC?
Out of the 16, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, there's nobody yet of the 16 that have started, and
The 5 years.
not one of them has reached the 5 years lifetime of the
Okay,
ACC.
so thank you for the clarification. Now, other than the ECC, the DNR issues area clearances. Okay. Now, I've been advised by some private industry stakeholders that the area clearance that was given for one particular project, which is it's called Horizons Manila joint venture with J Bros JV City of Manila, infringes on the navigational routes of the South Harbor, meaning that it will be a detriment to trade and commerce because the navigational routes will be affected. So may I ask the sponsor, what's your response to those type of concerns by stakeholders? Is DNR the right entity, or will this be DOTR, PPA, Coast Guard, Bureau of Customs? How is this particular concern going to be addressed?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, if it's regarding the marine throughway for ships to come and dock at the North Harbor or South Harbor for that effect, then the DOTR and the DNR works together. And there is one, as mentioned by the distinguished colleague, that was also included in the cumulative assessment of the DNR.
Compliance.
Could we get the report on that particular one, the basis for your issuance of the area clearance? Because I think you should publicize. There are concerns from shipping companies that the navigational routes will be adversely affected by this possible reclamation area.
Certainly, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, it will be submitted to you or to your office.
We're discussing the shipping company.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In your review, my last question, Mr. Speaker, in your review, I understand that the verbal order was made, so now PRA and DNR are working together to comply with the directive of the President. Now, may I request, when you do your assessment and your due diligence, I've been told that certain proponents have not paid the necessary regulatory fees. Meaning there are certain fees that's supposed to be paid, whether it's PRA or DNR, that maybe that should be identified. And I'm sure it will be easier for DNR and the other agencies involved with the reclamation to revoke any permits, issuances that you've made, because if the necessary regular fees haven't been paid, and there's been a few, I've been told, then you can set that aside and you will appease the public, the environmentalists, and many stakeholders. Because I didn't even realize there's that many in Manila Bay. What are the thoughts of the good sponsor?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, certainly before the end of the day, will be submitted to your office those who has ECC and yet their site compliance certificate has also been issued, but they are now being subject to the cumulative study of all the reclamation projects or
Okay.
under the full compliance review principle of the DNR. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
So my last question, Mr. Speaker, my absolute last question. If a proponent for a reclamation project has not paid the regularity fees as agreed upon, meaning they're delayed, will that be sufficient basis for DNR to cancel or withdraw the area clearance given to that particular proponent?
Mr. Speaker, yes, sufficient grounds to recall the area clearance certificate.
Okay, so I hope that the DNR will do that because there are a few who have not paid the necessary fees. And I hope the sponsor will support us on that to follow up on those particular ones.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, yes, we will follow up. And that also is like a docket fee in court. If you don't pay your docket fee, your case will not be heard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Your Honor.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my distinguished colleague. Thank you for your gracious answers, and we appreciate your responses. I'm satisfied, and that ends my interpellation, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, next, I move that you recognize Representative Richard Gomez of the 4th District of Leyte.
The gentleman from the 4th District of Leyte, the Honorable Richard Gomez, is recognized for his manifestation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much, the sponsor, for giving me some time and for entertaining me. Thank you. I'd like to take some time, Mr. Sponsor, so that you have an understanding of some things that's happening around my district. What is happening in my district is a microcosm of what is happening all over the country. Meaning to say, hindi po isolated yung mga nangyayari sa aming distrito. For now, I will only take 3 points, Mr. Sponsor. Unahin ko na ho yung mga protection of forest land. There are several laws for the protection of forest land. The PD 705, the NIPAS Act, the Environmental Impact System Law, Toxic Substances and Hazardous Waste Management Act, Clean Water Act, Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. Okay, so these are laws pertaining to protection of forest land and activities that will lead to the destruction, impairment and depletion of forest resources and protected areas. Kasama na ho dyan, marami yan, A, B, C, D, E. Kasama na rin yung issuance of tax declaration or title on forest lands absent certification from the DNR. Am I correct, Mr. Sponsor?
In the matter of timberlands, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, being issued tax declaration, that is supposed to be, I have to read the tax declaration, but timberland, Mr. Speaker, rests or goes beyond the commerce of man. It should not be touched.
Yes.
You can only temporarily occupy it if you have no dwelling. You can create your dwelling there without destructing or destroying the environment. And you can issue tax declaration on your improvement, but not on the land that you are squatting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. And in the country, we have at least 248 protected areas. Now, I'd like to manifest on the floor, Mr. Sponsor, that a forest land in my district, specifically in Palumpon, there's a confirmation that this lot is a forest land, therefore subject to reversion. Ibig sabihin no, natituluhan itong lupa na ito, 5150, pero ginagawa ng soil containment area. Soil containment area ginagawa pang compost pit. Nagtatapon ng mga toxic waste, infectious waste, needles, basura. And that is not the right way of protecting our forest land, especially ditong 5150 is a watershed area, Mr. Sponsor.
Mr. Speaker, that is correct. The use of forest lands or timberland for that matter as classified. Because there, Mr. Speaker, for the information of my colleague, forest lands have also some classification. There are unqualified or unclassified forest lands, but timberland has been demarcated all over the country. Timberland, Mr. Speaker, is beyond the commerce of man. No one can ever use the land without the tacit approval or a tenorial instrument from the DNR, Mr. Speaker.
Correct. Thank you so much, Mr. Sponsor. And the Regional Executive Director of Region 8, nag-issue ho siya. And finoward niya sa DNR Central Office yung draft petition with attachments already. Nandun na, nasa legal department na ninyo. No? Na sinasabi na itong lupa na ito, protected area to, waste, watershed ito, hindi to dapat ino-occupy, wala dapat issuance of title, wala ho issuance of ECC. And it's been there for a long period of time already. And it seems like baka kulang ho yung lawyer sa DENR. O hindi ho lang talaga tumatakbo. All of this, ang may kaalaman nito, of course, the personnel, head of personnel and operations sa DNR. I think, Mr. Sponsor, there is a USEC in charge for that. No? And I'll show you a document, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, that the DNR land is a forest land and subject for expansion na binigay pa to ng EMB. EMB issued an approved expansion to a forest land and ordered amendment pa ng ECC.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, for clarification, please clarify if that is a unclassified forest land or a timberland. Because unclassified timberland, the DNR has jurisdiction to reclassify that kind of forest land. But if it is classified as timberland, it's generally beyond the commerce of man. It cannot be titled or it cannot be issued tenurial instrument, Mr. Speaker, for the simple use of a habitat or for purposes of LGU using it, Mr. Speaker.
To categorize properties, land, Mr. Speaker, it's either legislated, proclaimed, or initial components po sila ng NIPAS Act.
Designated forest land or protected areas, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, can be issued SAPA, special approval on protected areas. But if there is no SAPA, then that DNR officer should follow the law. And if it is necessary for the reversion of that piece of land into the public domain, that is the natural course of order, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
But this is a watershed area, Mr. Speaker.
More so,
More so,
yes.
it should be protected.
But mind you, Mr. Speaker, in the protected area, there is a tenurial instrument that can be issued after undergoing several applications and several requirements of the DNR.
There
We
is
call
no
that
tenurial
special
instrument.
approval on protected area.
There's no tenurial instrument in this particular area, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
What is the pleasure of the Honorable Libanan?
I move to suspend the proceedings for a few minutes, Mr. Speaker.
Session suspended.
Okay.
Session resumes. And the Honorable Gomez has 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. Thank you, Minority Leader, for giving me this time and allowing me to eat up some of your time. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, I have all here evidence of documents and violations of that's happening in my district that requires strict attention from the DNR. For forest land and watershed, I ask you, Mr. Sponsor, that these areas cannot be touched, cannot be polluted, and it must be continuously protected. I ask you, Mr. Sponsor, to please inform this department to cancel the title of Lot Area 5150 and cancel the ECC of the pollutive business that is happening in that area. And there are other 2 more concerns, of which I will just give you the documents and request for the cancellation of the same.
Please continue your manifestation, Mr. Speaker.
I was only given 2 minutes. If you can initially cancel the title
Mr. Speaker.
that was given to a forest land protected area.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, I'd rather just make a small correction. In a protected area, Your Honor, a tenorial instrument can be issued by DNR, provided it goes within the roles of the PAMB. That is requirement number 1. Number 2 is, of course, it goes with the cumulative impact assessment by the DNR, and if so recommended by the PAMB, that can be issued a tenorial instrument. But since the distinguished colleague has manifested that it is a forest land and a title has been issued, and we are wondering why a forest land or a timberland, for that matter, has been issued a title when it should not have been issued. So in the matter of my colleague from Leyte, Mr. Speaker, I guarantee that this Friday, there will be action on his first request. The 2 other requests, subject to the presentation of the evidence, and I will see to it that the DNR will act on it with dispatch, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Gomez may conclude his manifestation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor. My fellow lawmakers, we must support the status quo. When the status quo is clearly broken, allow me to quote the first part of the department's mandate on its website from Executive Order 192 of 1987, that the department is a primary agency responsible for the conservation, management, development, and proper use of the country's environment and natural resources, specifically forest and grazing lands, mineral resources, including those in reservation and watershed areas, and lands of public domain, etc., etc. So please, let me reiterate that there is overwhelming evidence on illegal occupation of forest land in Palumpon watershed and forest reserve. There is an overwhelming knowledge of dumping infectious and toxic waste for years, Mr. Speaker, inside the same forest land and watershed. And there are repeated offenses of which the activities continue to go on without any penalties. So in the meantime, the surrounding communities continue to suffer the unbearable stench and the health issues that come with these unlawful activities. Nature, on the other hand, suffers more. Water that used to be potable straight from the springs in San Joaquin, Palumpon continue to flow, but now the water is a far cry from crisp, clean water that residents of San Joaquin still recall. Ngayon po, para ng kape, yung tubig doon. Please, I ask you this. I know that the Secretary is very new in this position. Marami pa sa hindi nalalaman tungkol sa mga nangyayari sa mga region at sa mababang level ng katauhan nila dyan. Does the DNR tolerate inaction of the very officers in charge of the regulation? Yun lang yung tinatanong ko. And lastly, I ask you to remember, in the mind's eye, the image of Lady Justice. She is blindfolded. Justice, lest we conveniently forget, is blind. It is to be meted out impartially without regard to the identity, the power, the influence of the person being tried. It should be unbiased. So the DNR has pledged and is mandated to protect our environment. Given all that has happened, all facts laid out, with even more evidence forthcoming, I trust that you will do the right thing, Madam Secretary, Mr. Sponsor. Maraming salamat po. Please give us environmental justice.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the Honorable Minority Leader, the Honorable Nonoy Libanan.
The Honorable Libanan is recognized.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it appears that the Honorable gentleman from Ormoc wants to perform the job of the minority in his inquiry and manifestation. Mr. Speaker, I would like to manifest that if the Honorable Richard Gomez would so desire to be a member of the minority, then we welcome him with open hearts so that he can be a member of the minority. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. Please give me some time and let me think about it. Thank you so much for welcoming me to your group. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we recognize the Honorable Caraps Paduano.
The Honorable Paduano is recognized for his interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon to the DNR family, especially to my fellow Ilonggo, the sponsor, Governor Congressman Alvarez. Will the good gentleman yield to some clarificatory questions?
Certainly, kung gusto mo eh,
Oh, that's good.
Mr. Speaker.
Fine. Thank you.
permit me to speak in our vernacular.
Please don't consume my time, my fellow Ilonggo. Anyway, first, the National Greening Program seeks to plant 1.5 billion trees in 1.5 million hectares for a period of 6 years through EO 26. And after some time, it was extended or expanded through EO 193 for the next 12 years after the first EO expired. Now, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, ang target po natin is 1.5 billion trees and in 1.5 million hectares. That was the target 2011 to 2016. Now, it was extended. Why it was extended?
Mr. Speaker, siling nila dungagan pa ang area mo. May ara para nga undi nila natamnan ka. That's why, Mr. Speaker, ginapadayo nila ang pagtanom.
Anyway, it's the pleasure of the House for the sponsor to answer in Ilonggo. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, the target is 1.5 million for the next 6 years. Now, yung 1.5 million of hectares na 1.5 billion trees was achieved since 2011 to 2016.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Your Honor.
How much is the budget?
From the last 10 years, Mr. Speaker, as
No,
I
no, no.
recall,
Mr. Speaker, sorry, I'll just interrupt you. For the EO 26, since 2011 to 2016, how much was the total budget for EO 26?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, 32 billion for that particular period.
2 billion.
32 billion.
32 billion. Now, is that 32 billion that was spent in the last 6 years, since 2011 to 2016, is that the projected budget for the timeline from EO 26? Or you don't have a timeline of budget for EO 26?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, what, Mr. Sponsor? That
Yes,
was
the
the
budget
budget.
for the 2011 to the 2016.
Now, in short, EO 193 was an EO to expand the National Greening Program.
Enhancement. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, it is enhancement executive order.
Enhancement. Hindi siya
Enhancement, Your Honor.
expanded.
Enhancement, Mr. Speaker.
So, enhancement. In short, pag sinabi natin enhancement, correct ba ako doon, na ito po ay extended at the same time, nag-expand tayo. In-extend natin, ang hindi inabutan, at saka in-expand natin.
Pinalawig Mr. Speaker.
Sorry?
Pinalawig.
Anyway, so it was extended. Now, how much is the projected budget for the NGP covering EO 193? Remember, that is only, it doubles the timeline. Because the first timeline was only 6 years. Now, EO 93 specify for the next,
17 to 23.
no, for the next 12 years. Kasi from 2025 to 2028.
From 17 to
2016 to 2028, sorry.
From 2017 to 2022.
So,
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor,
2022? No,
25 billion.
no. EO 193, pinag-usapan natin.
EO
2016 to 2022?
EO 193 is 2017 to 2028.
28, tama. So, almost double compared to the first EO that was signed by the then President Benigno Aquino. Anyway, so, how much is the projected budget for this EO 193?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, this goes for a request budget of 2.4 billion on a yearly basis.
So 2.4 billion per year, annual.
To Your Honor, projected, wala, estimate lang na Mr. Speaker eh.
Mr. Speaker, Ginoong Sponsor, why I'm asking this? Because we have to check. In the following questions that I will raise, it's all about the success rate and the survival rate.
9%.
Kaya kailangan natin makita ito, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor. Now, especially the COA findings. Pupunta tayo mamaya doon. Ang sinasabi ko lang, of course, that is a projected budget, but of course, you have to make a projected budget based on the previous EO. Tama. So in short, dapat, siguro ng mga nasa times 2, nasa 64 billion for the next 12 years. Tama? Am I correct to say that we need at least from 2016 to 2028 is around 64 billion? Because the years was doubled.
54 billion, Mr. Speaker.
54 billion. Okay. 54 billion. Now, balikan ko lang, 2011 to 2016. What was the success rate?
Survival rate,
No,
Mr.
no.
Speaker. Huh?
Sorry. The success rate.
Success rate of planting, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, is 78%.
78%.
Planting,
Yeah, planting. Of course. Survival rate.
survival rate, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, it shows in the graph also 78% on 100%.
78%. Now, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, EO 193, sabi po ng sponsor, enhancement. yung EO 193. But it only shows if, of course, I will not question the data of the DNR with regards to success rate and survival rate. But I have to check also, babalikan ko lang yung COA findings. Now, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, with the 78%
Of the
success rate and 78% survival rate, in short, 22% was lost. Tama po ba? And 22% of 32 billion is around 6.4 billion. Tama? Tama po ba? More or less. More or less.
More or less, Mr. Speaker. Oh,
Okay. Now, gusto ko lang puntahan yung question of the budget for the past 3 years. Huwag na tayo babalik doon sa 2016, EO 193, 2016 to 2028. Now, I would just like to ask,
21, 22, 20.
budget for replanting and planting of new areas vis-a-vis doon sa protection and maintenance. Why I'm asking that, Mr. Speaker? Because I would just like to put the premise with a 78% survival rate and 78 success rate during the 2011-2016 through EO 26. Now may 22% na problema. I have to check, and we have to check the balance of budget for the replanting and the new areas vis-a-vis the maintenance and protection. How much the budget for the maintenance and protection for the past 3 years? 2022, 21, and 2020. Doon na lang po tayo.
Roughly, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, 50% and another 50% is for maintenance.
50% for
50, Mr. Speaker.
50% for planting, 50% for maintenance. Okay. Now, matanong lang po, since 2011 to 2016, ganito din ba ang percentage between the planting and maintenance and protection?
Mr. Speaker, more or less the same, Your Honor.
Yun yung problema, Mr. Speaker, because we targeted 1.5 million hectares with a 78% survival rate. Now, question, Mr. Speaker, we should put a bigger budget for the protection and maintenance. Kasi with 22% na problema, dapat ang next budget from 2017 to 2028, we should put a bigger budget for the protection and maintenance. I hope the good sponsor and the DNR will join me in that position, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, for the information of His Honor, once you attain 5 years of planting, especially on a species that can close canopy in 5 years, you don't have to maintain because walang damo tutubo sa baba.
Yeah, but of course,
Ngunit, Mr. Speaker, kung ang planted area ay hindi maka-close canopy, tuloy pa rin yung sunlight, matutuyo yung lupa, may tutubong kugon, yan ang kailangan ng maintenance, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
okay, I will agree with you, but the question is, bakit 78% lang yung survival rate natin? 2011 and 2016. Now, 2017 to 2022, ano yung survival rate?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, Simply, because when you plant, you maintain for the next 3 years. There are so many disturbances that will occur to the area. One is Mr. Sigarillo. Mr. Speaker, isang naninigarilyo kung may kugon, tinapon yan sa kugon, goodbye yung pinlant mo. Kaya starting when I sponsored DNR budget, I tasked them also, Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, to caution na dapat may barangay malapit doon sa tinataniman nila kasi alagaan ng barangay. Especially 50%, Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, are high-value crops and people are tending to it. Nobody will cut those trees. But if nobody is there, the problem with our impoverished constituents in the area, they believe that the trees are planted for them. And there is no justice if you bring those people to court. Number one, Mr. Speaker, even the judges in the local scenery have compassion for the poor. And the DNR is walang magawa, is helpless if the perpetrator is from the downtrodden and the talagang walang-wala. So, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, I really suggest that in the future planting activities of DNR, the barangay must be consulted and if possible, shift the planting into 50% high-value crops, which the barangay could have something to derive in the next few years, and only the rest in order to reforest our denuded highlands. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Okay, anyway, the question of maintenance and protection. Okay, as of now, of course, the barangay is not yet involved, no, principally. Now, that is the suggestion of the good sponsor. But as of now, who protects and who maintains?
Mr. Speaker, the community is engaged. Most of these reforestation programs are CBFMS, Community-Based Forestry Management Agreement, to POs, to civil society, and to indigenous people that are found in the denuded areas.
Okay. In one beneficiary, for example, in one family, how big can a family or a beneficiary at average?
It depends, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor. If the community-based forestry management agreement consists of several residents, for example, 100 residents, then maybe they can tend to 100 hectares. So the area determinant of the to be planted is determined by the number of hands that will help in the propagation of the greening program, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
So 1:1.
Hopefully, because, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, 1 hectare is now given a maintenance fee of 3 years for 6,000 pesos, of which this representation has made representation with the DNR to increase it to 5 years and make it 10,000 because 3,000, Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, would just be enough to go to the cockpit and buy Ginebra San Miguel.
Yeah, that's correct. That will be my next point, Your Honor. Kasi po, if a family maintains at least maximum of 3 pa, kahit 3 hectares, no? A family. Now, yung scheme ba ngayon ng DNR for the compensation is still 132 or 123?
Spacing?
No,
Or
1,000
maintenance? Huh?
1,000 peso per
Mr.
hectare
Speaker.
on the first year.
Now it's 3,000 for 1 hectare, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
And then you mentioned about the 6,000.
366 something. For 1
Now,
hectare.
the exact what? Kasi you mentioned about the 6,000 for 1 year.
I will read, Mr. Speaker,
About
for the first year, 3,000 pesos. On the second year is 6,000. And on the third year, Your Honor, another 6,000. So a total of 15,000, Your Honor,
So,
for 3 years.
it was already adjusted by the DNR. First year is 3,000, am I correct? Second year is 6,000,
366.
366. At least, it was already cleared because the original compensation was too low. But of course, I joined the good sponsor in increasing the compensation for the beneficiary. Tama ka po. Kasi
Yes,
kung
Mr.
ako,
Speaker, Your Honor, it was already increased because of your prior consultation with me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
anyway, anyway, but if the DNR can increase it further, mas maganda po. No? Kasi sabi ko na nga, if I am a beneficiary, I'd rather go to the cities and drive a tricycle than get 3,000 pesos for the whole year. Yung maintenance, problema. Diba? Kaya, Mr. Speaker, again, balikan ko lang yung 22%. I think yung malaking contribution doon sa survival rate. Problema sa survival rate ng NGCP program is the compensation for the beneficiaries because instead of maintaining that particular hectare of lands, bababa na ako at maghanap ng trabaho sa baba. Diba? So
Hey, Mr. Speaker.
I hope the DNR will increase the compensation of 366 to more better compensation for those beneficiaries, for them, to encourage them to maintain the
Mr.
program.
Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I'd like to request Your Honor to make a motion to increase the DNR greening budget from 2.4 billion to 5 billion, Mr. Speaker.
In the proper time, because this is not the time. You know our rules. In the proper time. But this will be my last question, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor. And I will join the sponsor to propose an amendment if I will be satisfied by the answer of the good sponsor, of course, the DNR office. Now, let me proceed with my next question, Mr. Speaker. The forest, this is all about the NGP, which is related to Forest Management Bureau. The FMB is responsible for providing overall technical support to the implementation of the National Breeding Program. In pursuit of such tasks, the Bureau entered into multiple contracts of service with Mr. Vicente Batad, a Filipino-Canadian residing in Canada, for the setting up of 5 mechanized forest nurseries and 11 nurseries nationwide in support for the National Greening Program. Am I correct, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, that would be very much welcome. We need the specifics, Mr. Speaker, and we will incorporate it in the
Yeah.
MMFN case. One case of this suggestion, Your Honor.
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking, if am I correct to say that FMB contracted the services of Mr. Vicente Batad, a
Forest Management Bureau.
Filipino-Canadian resident? Am I correct?
Sinabi mo eh, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, thank you. At least you confirm. Now, the contracts awarded to Mr. Batad were procured through alternative modes of procurement. There was no record on file on the basis of awarding the contract in 2013. But it was stated in the contracts attached to the disbursement vouchers covering the payment of consultative services for the months of July 2013 and January to March 2014. There was no specified mode of procurement on the contracts for the months of November 13 to December 31, 2013, and the years following 2015, 2016, and 2017. Am I correct, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Your Honor is correct.
So how much is the total amount downloaded for the payment of such consultative services from 2013 to 2017?
How much money, Mr. Speaker?
How much was downloaded
Downloaded.
for the services of Mr. Batad from 2013 to 2017?
Buligi sila. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, 85,000 a month for the last 6 years. Ba? Good money, Mr. Speaker.
85,000
Per month
per month.
for the last 6 years.
Anyway, Mr. Speaker, hindi pareho po yung data natin. But anyway, we'll just consult each other with regards to the data. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, so the total amount that was downloaded to a Filipino-Canadian not residing in the Philippines as a consultant, ang data ko po from 2013 to 2017, it's around 11,447,163.33 centavos to be exact, Your Honor, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, hindi 11 million. 9 million lang daw.
Anyway,
9,956,999.80.
anyway, pagtagpuin na lang natin to reconcile the data. But on June 10, 2022, the NGO, sir, Ms. Edna D. Nuestro, the director of FMB, was formally charged because of this, because of the EUM by the COA for gross neglect of duty and conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service through administrative case number 2022-07-02. Am I correct, Mr. Speaker, Your
Mr.
Honor?
Speaker, kinasuhan ng administrative proceedings ng and it's already for decision. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
So, wala pang final.
Wala pa. We will give it to you, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
When will be the final judgment for this case? Kasi it was filed on June 10, 2022. And now, it's almost 1 year, more than 1 year.
Mr. Speaker, DNR admin case pala ito. So, it's forthcoming. Since you brought it up, Mr. Speaker, I'll give you a copy within 10 days' time.
10 days.
Is that accepted, Mr. Speaker?
Yes,
Honor?
I accept the timeline.
Thank you very
stated
much.
by the good sponsor. Now, criminal case.
Criminal case, Your Honor.
Yes,
10 days.
10 days din. Okay. So thank you. Thank you for that answer, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Sorry, di natapos. Tagal naman.
Ito po, in question of the modernized and mechanized forest nurseries. First, how did you identify where should be these facilities be stationed nationwide?
Ano nangyari?
Was there qualification and parameters set? And what is the present status of this MMFN?
Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, because of the meager source of the planting materials, there was a move to mechanize the production of seedlings. But until now, it's being pursued and it's not further strengthened. But they're using it already. They're producing
My
some
question,
seedlings by
Mr. Speaker,
mechanization already, Mr. Speaker. Your
with due respect to the good sponsor, my question is the qualifications and parameters set by this program. And saan po nakastation ito?
Where?
Is it by province, by region? What is the qualification for this program?
Where, Mr. Speaker, where the NGP is situated by region, we have region 2 to 13 and selected regions, but also in the forestry seedling production and being distributed to most regions. And the mechanized seedling production is mostly on region 2, 3, 4A, 5, Banyao. If you are asking for the place, region 5 in Suok, and region 6, region 7, region 9, region 12, and region 13. Mr. Speaker, Your Honor.
Since the establishment of this program, Mr. Speaker, Your Honor, are they all functional?
Yeah, per this report, Mr. Speaker, yes, they are operational.
All,
Except for those machines that bug down, Mr. Speaker.
except for those
Machines that bug down.
back down.
They are not humans, Mr.
Mr. Ang
Speaker.
tanong ko nga, kung operational nga ilan yung back down?
So far, it's operational.
Lahat.
But we'll never know when it's going to bug down.
But of course, as of now,
As of now,
operational.
because if I will bring you there, it's still operating, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, anyway, I will belabor on that question, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Paduano is requested to please wrap up.
Anyway, this will be my last question, Mr. Speaker. Okay, I have few more questions, but anyway, I would just like to manifest, Mr. Speaker, that the National Greening Program, in which, of course, I have to check all the data being presented to me with this honorable body by the good sponsor with regards to the success rate and the survival rate. Because the program being extended by another 12 years needs to be scrutinized of this Congress. Because the budget of this agency, of this program emanates from Congress. As part of our oversight, Mr. Speaker, you have to check if indeed the program effectively address the mission of such program, especially the reforestation program of this country. With that, Mr. Speaker, it ends my interpellation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. My
Thank you,
fellow Ilonggo.
Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, everyone.
Majority Leader.
Point of inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
What is the pleasure of the Honorable Franz Castro?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would like to inquire on our schedule for today because as written in our schedule for today, after the office of the after the OP, there should be OVP and Department of Education. So at this point in time, so what is the estimated time that the budget deliberation for OVP and the DepEd be deliberated today?
The
Is it-
Majority Leader will respond.
Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Vice President, as well as the Office of the Department of Education, the Secretary of the Department of Education has conveyed a message to the Committee on Appropriations as well as to the Committee on Rules of a possible conflict in schedule, details of which the Majority Leader, I mean, yours truly is not yet that privy, but precise for us to say that as of the moment, the deliberation of the proposed budget of the OVP as well as DepEd has been temporarily moved tomorrow, considering that we also have other agencies in the pipeline, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we now recognize the Honorable Paul Daza.
The Honorable Paul Dasa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to our esteemed colleague, the Honorable Alvarez, the sponsor. Thank you to the DNR family for your personal presence here. And having no more members of the minority who wishes to propound questions, I move to terminate the period of sponsorship and debate for the budget of the DNR for fiscal year 2024.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, on the part of the majority, we join the minority in the motion to terminate the interpellations on the proposed budget of the Department
Environment and Natural Resources.
of Environment and Natural Resources, including its attached agencies or corporations.
There is a joint motion to terminate the interpellations on the proposed budget of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, including attached agencies and corporations. Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The interpellations on the proposed budget of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, including attached agencies
you,
and
Mr. Speaker.
corporations, is hereby terminated. Congratulations.
Kung gusto mo, waray-waray. Di ako gusto mo Muslim. Marunong din ako Muslim eh.